Welcome back everybody to the Hogs of War Miniatures game. Today it's all about part 4 of this guide series as we take a look at the next stage, the recruitment phase. Now at this point in the game the player should have formed some kind of swill income, either from the refineries they begin the game with or from capturing swill pumps that are placed around the battlefield. As long as the player has already purchased the necessary buildings that unlock specific upgrades, all of those upgrades will be available to buy and use in this phase. These include weapon upgrade cards, vehicle upgrade cards for your planes and other vehicles, and so long as you have an airship construction hangar, airship modification cards. This is the phase where you'll be able to start putting your airships together. However, you must remember that you will require the minimum 3 parts in order to then deploy your airship. So those parts are of course the nose, the middle section and the tail. The cheapest and smallest airship you can build will cost a total of 10 swill, making it the most expensive vehicle in the game so far. However, should you want to make a longer airship, you'll be looking at a much higher cost. It's also worth noting that seeing as the maximum amount of swill one player can hold is 12, any airship that has multiple middle sections will be most likely too expensive to build in a single round. So if you're looking to deploy a big airship, just remember it's going to take you at least 2 rounds of play to actually get it onto the battlefield. So the latest update on TTS for the miniatures game has brought with it a total of 12 airship modification cards. We have 3 different cards for the nose and tail, while the game now offers 6 brand new middle sections that completely change the utility of the airship. Previously we were limited to either a cannon or bomb bay, but now we have a much broader selection. So starting with the nose section of the plane, we have the Snaffler. This costs 3 swill and offers a machine gun that shoots at a range of 1, 2 or 3. Through the combination of rolling melee dice and gun dice, it allows the player to shoot either straight forward or slightly to the left or right. The Screw Tip X, which costs 6 swill, has a range of just 1 and can only shoot straight forward. However, it can instantly destroy any adjacent enemy aerial vehicle. And finally, the Snouter, costing 5 swill. It offers a cannon that has a range of 3, 4 or 5 through the combination of rolling melee and explosive dice, and can shoot in the same way as the Snaffler, straight forward or 1 hex to the left or right. Players are also able to swap out any melee dice for gun dice as a free action. Meanwhile, the tail modification cards can offer up the Curly Whirly, costing 3 swill, and as the name suggests, it focuses primarily on offering high turn values and less on speed. Then we have the Pigsail, costing 5 swill and sits as a kind of in-between, as this modification card is perhaps the most balanced out of all 3 tail cards, offering a combination of both turning and speed. And finally we have the Rocket Rump, costing 6 swill, and once again the idea is all in the name. This card is all about low initiative values and travelling quickly, at the lowest instance offering a movement speed of 5 and turning of 0. And next up we move on to the main body of the airship, starting with the bomb belly, costing 4 swill. This is basically an updated version of the bomb bay, this time costing a little bit more swill, but offering up a total of 3 bombs that can be dropped at once. There's also the gun styes, also costing 4 swill, and once again this appears to be an updated version of the cannon bay, offering a range of 1, 2 or 3 and combining gun and explosive dice to deal damage. Then we have the bore sides. This is a brand new card that costs 5 swill and offers the player a cannon that can shoot 1 hex to the left or right from both the front and the back of the airship. This gun has a range of 3, 4 or 5 and uses melee and explosive dice to deal damage. Changing things up even more though as we move on to the Medi-Pig Bay. At the cost of 5 swill, this middle section of the airship can be used to remove all damage from friendly infantry units that are adjacent to the airship. So a complete change in utility for the blimp, as previously the focus was on dealing damage, but now we have the option to use the blimp to heal ground unit targets. Just imagine a medical airship that uses the rocket rump tail just whizzing around the map dishing out heals. That would be pretty crazy. Next up is a little nod to Toy Story, as we have the Claw, costing 6 swill. Its main purpose is to place or return an adjacent ground vehicle either onto this card or onto the board. So essentially it can be used to pick up and transport vehicles across the board using the airship as a means of transportation. That is certainly an important focus, considering that not all vehicles are able to maneuver as quickly as others, so being able to rely on one of your own airships to pick them up and take them elsewhere on the board is going to be very interesting to see during gameplay. And last but not least, we have the Parahog at the cost of 8 swill, and as I'm sure you've guessed, this modification card is used to spawn infantry from the blimp itself. So alongside being able to deploy your troops from your own base, from trenches and bunkers, you can also spawn them from the airship too. Following on from the airship cards, we can also find 6 upgrade cards for the biplane as well. These include the Steel Hawk Pit. This costs 3 swill and forces the opponent to roll 1 less gun dice when attacking the unit that holds this upgrade card. Grill rounds, which also cost 3 swill and offer a machine gun that has a range of 1, 2 or 3. If the player manages to hit their target when using the machine gun, 1 burn token will be applied to the enemy vehicle. Then we have the Pigcision bombs. They cost 3 swill as well and simply allow the player to drop bombs when travelling at a speed of 4. Remember that normally bombs can't be dropped when travelling at a speed of 4, 5 or 6. Next is the Tail Gunner, costing 4 swill and offering, as the name implies, a tail gun that can be shot from the back of the biplane. With a range of 1, 2 or 3 and using a combination of gun and explosive dice, it's another great use of directional defense, as the player is only able to fire the weapon directly behind them, or 1 hex to the left or right of the back of the plane. The Gear Crank is next, costing 4 swill. This upgrade allows the player to change to any speed. However, as stated on the card, if they change more than 2 positions, they must roll 1 explosive dice against themselves. And lastly, we have the Pig Ear Wings. This upgrade costs 5 swill and can offer the player the ability to turn up to 1 additional hex at a speed of 2 and 3. So that is the complete breakdown of the aerial unit upgrade cards, but what about the ground vehicles? Well, as it is with the biplane, ground unit vehicles have a choice of up to 6 upgrade cards. Starting with the cheapest, we have the Piggers M gun. Costing 3 swill, this machine gun offers a range of 1, 2 or 3 and combines rolling gun and explosive dice. The Hedge Trimmer, also costing 3 swill. This upgrade card allows players to move this unit through forest tiles, as normally vehicles are not able to do this. Meanwhile, the Fire Extinguisher, costing 4 swill, as the name implies, it can be used to remove 1 burn token from the vehicle should they be damaged. The Iron Belly also costs 4 swill, and just like the Steel Hawk Pit on the biplane, this upgrade card forces the opponent to roll their attack with 1 less gun dice. Next up is the Big Red Button, costing 5 swill. This is essentially a self-destruct ability. When used, the unit is removed and the player is allowed to roll 4 explosive dice. The damage from that roll will then be inflicted on all units that are standing on adjacent hexes to the exploding vehicle. And finally, we have the most expensive upgrade card in the entire game. It is the Big Willy Mark IV. At the cost of 12 swill, the player is able to add 1 additional action point to their vehicle, which in relation to gameplay is pretty huge. I mean, hey, it's not called Big Willy for nothing. So before we move on to the infantry side of things within the recruitment phase, let's break down the cost of all the units in the miniatures game. We have the Grunt, which costs 2 swill. The Orderly, Engineer, Sniper and Bombardier all cost 3 swill each. Planes cost 8 swill, and airships cost a minimum of 10 swill. Meanwhile, tanks, aqua tanks and armoured cars all cost 6 swill. In the last video, I did struggle to actually find the armoured car card. Turns out it was actually on the other side of the aqua tank. Now, speaking to the devs about this, I found out that in the recruitment phase, the player is only allowed to purchase 1 type of vehicle, either an aqua tank or an armoured car. Tank units are separate, you can buy as many of those as you want, but in relation to the aqua tank and armoured car, I guess the player must assess the board and make the decision on which vehicle would be more important given the situation on the battlefield. There are also 2 very important details you need to know before we dive into all of the infantry card upgrades and what they can bring to the table, and that is that all Hog units, including vehicles, are limited to 2 upgrade cards each. Upgrades cannot be removed, exchanged or replaced once they have been bought, and players may only purchase 1 specific named upgrade card, so for instance you cannot purchase more than 1 jetpack. So let's get into these 18 weapon upgrade cards. We can break them down into 3 different categories: the grunt only weapons, specialist weapons and rank only weapons. Grunt only weapons are pretty self-explanatory. These weapons can only be used by the grunt. Specialist weapons are class specific weapons or abilities that can only be used by the class of pig mentioned on the card. And finally we have rank only weapons, which can be used by any rank of pig except for the grunt unit. So starting with the grunt only weapons, we have the bayonet, which costs 4 swill, has a range of just 1 and adds 1 additional melee dice to your standard attack with the rifle. Grenades, which cost 2 swill, have a range of 1 or 2 and requires the player to just roll 1 explosive dice in order to use them. And finally, rifle practice, which also costs 4 swill, has a range of 2 or 3 and adds 1 additional gun dice across all ranges to your standard attack. Next up are the rank only weapons. The jetpack, which costs 4 swill, allows the player to move 5 hexes, but in doing so they must roll 2 melee dice against themselves to determine if they have landed safely or crashed. The grenade launcher costs 4 swill, has a range of 3 and 4, and you must roll 1 melee and explosive dice on both ranges. Cluster bombs also cost 4 swill, have a range of 1, 2 and 3, and they roll a combination of melee and explosive dice as well. The super shotgun costs 5 swill, has a range of 1, 2 or 3, and rolls primarily melee dice except on range 3 where you roll 1 gun dice. The crazy gun, also known as the ray gun, costs 4 swill, has a range of 1, 2, 4 and 5, and has a weird combination of dice and effects. At range 1 you apply 1 burn token, at range 2 you roll 1 gun and explosive dice, at range 3 you just can't use that because that range isn't allowed while using the ray gun, range 4 you roll 2 melee dice, and range 5 you roll 1 explosive dice and apply 1 stun token. Then we have the mind control device, which costs 4 swill and has full range of 6, however requires 2 action points to be used. Across all ranges, if damage is done, a stun token is applied to the targeted pig. It's also worth noting that stun tokens work in the same way as they did in the card game, in that the pig who is affected by the stun cannot do anything until the stun has been removed, which in this case requires 1 action point to remove said stun. And finally, field training costs 4 swill and it allows the first movement action to move 2 hexes forward. And finally we have the specialist weapons, starting with the espionage class. We have madness gas costing 3 swill. There is no range because it moves all adjacent enemy hogs that are affected by the madness gas 2 hexes in any direction. Then there's the super sniper costing 3 swill with a range of 3, 4 and 5. It adds 1 additional gun dice at range 3, 1 additional melee dice at range 4 and 5. Then the medic class has the cattle prod costing 3 swill. With just a range of 1, it requires the player to roll 2 melee dice, and they can also apply 2 stun tokens to the targeted pig. The tranquilizer darts cost 5 swill with a range of 2 and 3. The player must roll 1 additional melee dice and apply 1 stun token within both ranges. Then the engineer class has the Molotov cocktail with a cost of 4 swill and a range of 1, 2 and 3. They roll a combination of melee dice and apply a set number of burn tokens. Then the super TNT also costs 3 swill with a range of 1. The player just has to roll 4 explosive dice, so plenty of damage there. And finally, last but not least, the heavy weapons pig has the flamethrower with a cost of 4 swill, a range of 1, 2 and 3. The player must roll 2 melee dice at range 1 and 2 with a burn token, and range 3 only 1 burn token with no dice. And the mortar costs 4 swill with a range of 3, 4 and 5. You must roll all 3 dice types at range 3, 1 gun and explosive dice at range 4, and just 1 gun dice at range 5. Once an upgrade card has been bought, you place it underneath the unit card it is assigned to. So once your new units and upgrades have been bought and constructed, it's time to get them out there onto the battlefield. Unless they're para-dropped in, or they're in a trench or in a bunker, new units are immediately deployed adjacent to your base hex onto any available plain terrain hex. Overall though guys, that is going to wrap everything up for the recruitment phase. It's a very simple but exciting point in the game because you finally get to buy stuff and make your units stronger. However, what I want to know from you guys is, what is your favourite upgrade card? Let me know your answers in the comments, and of course if you do happen to have any questions about the recruitment phase or the miniatures game overall, then feel free to ask me down there. In the meantime, that's going to wrap it up for everything in this video. Join me in the next one where we move on to the 5th and final part of this guide series, the end phase.